It's 4 in the morning. It's completely dark. And something large is breathing about 6 feet from your bed. Don't panic, it's a cow. She lives here. So do 2 pigs, some chickens, your 5 children. And everyone sleeps in the same room because this is the year 1300 and you are a peasant in medieval England. Which means your house is also a barn, your alarm clock is a rooster, and your day is about to be very, very long. Now, you've probably heard 2 stories about this life. The first one says it was pure misery, mud, plague, dying at 30. The second one, the one currently doing numbers on the internet, says medieval peasants actually had it better than you. More holidays, less work, no emails. Here's the fun part. Both stories are wrong. And the truth is stranger than either of them. Because the thing that made a peasant's life hard wasn't the plowing. It was something much more familiar. It was the fees. But first, let's figure out who you actually are. If you lived in medieval Europe, you were almost certainly a peasant, not a knight, not a monk, not a wizard, a farmer. Historians estimate that roughly 9 out of every 10 people worked the land. In 1086, William the Conqueror ordered a survey of everything and everyone in England, the Domesday Book. And the picture it paints is a country of small farming villages, over and over and over, all the way to the horizon. And within that world, there's a detail that matters enormously, whether you're free or not, because odds are decent, you're what the English called a villain, a serf. You're not a slave. Nobody owns you exactly. But you're legally attached to the land. You can't leave the manor without permission. You can't marry off your daughter without permission. Legally speaking, you belong to the address. In exchange, you get a house, strips of land in the village fields, and the right to not starve on someone else's property. It's a deal. It's just not a deal you ever got to negotiate because you inherited it the moment you were born. So, the rooster goes off. What does your day actually look like? You get up in the dark and you get dressed, which takes about 4 seconds because you mostly slept in your clothes. Your house is one long room, historians call it a longhouse, with a fire pit in the middle of the floor and no chimney. The smoke just drifts up into the thatch and finds its own way out, which means everything you own smells like a campfire, including you. The animals live at one end of the house because they're valuable, because thieves exist, and because, genuinely, a cow puts out a lot of heat. Your livestock is also your radiator. Breakfast is bread and ale. Then it's out the door because the day's work depends on the season, and the season is the only calendar that matters. Spring is plowing and sowing. Summer is haymaking. Autumn is the harvest. The make or break sprint of the entire year. Winter is repairs, threshing, and trying not to freeze. But here's the thing that separates your workday from a modern one. You don't just work your own land. If you're a villain, you owe your lord what was called week work, typically 2 to 3 days every week, laboring on the lord's personal fields, the domain. His harvest gets brought in with your back, and during the busy seasons, he can demand extra days on top, called boon work, which is a wonderful medieval word for mandatory overtime. So picture the arrangement. Roughly half your working week goes to a man in the big house for free, forever, and your own crops, the ones your children eat. Get whatever's left of you. And if you're thinking, well, at least once the work is done, you're square with him. Oh no, 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 no. Because this is where we get to the fees. And the fees are where medieval life stops looking like a fantasy novel and starts looking like the worst subscription service ever invented. You want to grind your own grain? You can't. You have to use the Lord's mill, and the Lord's mill takes a cut. You want your daughter to marry a man from the next village? That'll be a fee, it was called merchet, payable to the Lord, because her future children were his future workforce, and he expects to be compensated for the loss. Break a rule, miss a workday, let your pig wander into the wrong field? The manor court finds you, and when you die, this is real. Your family owes the Lord a death duty called Harriet. Traditionally, your best animal. Your family loses you, and then, that same week, they lose the cow. The Lord taxed your wedding and your funeral. Birth to death, full coverage. And after the Lord took his share, the church took a tithe. 1/10 of everything you produced every year. So the medieval peasant wasn't just a farmer. A farmer grows food. You were something closer to a payment plan with legs. Which brings us to the internet's favorite claim, because if life was that squeezed, what about all those famous holidays? You've seen the meme. Medieval peasants only worked 150 days a year. It gets shared every time someone has a bad Monday. And here's the honest answer. It's built on something real, and then stretched. The real part, the church calendar was genuinely packed. 52 Sundays off, plus dozens of holy days scattered through the year. Feast days, festivals, saints' days, when regular labor stopped. The number traces back to work by economists, including Gregory Clark and Juliet Shore. And some recent economic historians have found evidence for a working year that's short, but mainly for hired laborers in specific stretches of the later Middle Ages, when wages were unusually high. Other scholars put the working year far higher, and the debate is genuinely still going. And there's a catch the meme always leaves out. A day off meant no field labor for pay or for the Lord. It did not mean the cow fed herself. Animals, water, firewood, cooking, mending, the household never closed. A medieval holiday was less vacation and more working from home. Still, dozens of real festival days, with ale and games and the whole village together, that part's true. By the standards of the miserable mud version of history, that's a genuinely decent social life. The medieval peasant went to more parties than you do. Sit with that. So maybe the meme has a point. Maybe, fees aside, this life was fine. Here's where I have to stop being funny for a minute. Because everything I've described, the work, the holidays, the ale, all of it balanced on one assumption, that the harvest comes in. And sometimes it didn't. A peasant family lived permanently about one bad year from catastrophe. There was no savings account. The savings account was the grain in the barn, and it had to last until the next harvest, no matter what. Now imagine the rain starts in the spring of 1315 and doesn't stop. The fields flood. The seed rots in the ground. The harvest fails. Then it fails again the next year, and the next. This actually happened. It's called the Great Famine, and from 1315 to about 1322, relentless rain and crop failure starved Northern Europe. People ate their seed grain, which is eating your own future. They ate the plow animals. By some estimates, around 1 in 10 people in the affected towns and countryside died. In some regions more. And the chronicles from those years describe things I'll simply say were desperate and leave there. That was the deal underneath the whole medieval world. The holidays were real. The margin was a lie. And every peasant knew it, every single year, standing in the field, looking at the sky. Let's come back to an ordinary evening, though, a good year, because most years were ordinary, and that's the point of this video. The light fades and work stops, because work has to stop. Candles cost money, and there's a curfew. The word literally comes from the French couvre-feu. Cover the fire. The nightly signal to damp your hearth so you don't burn down the village, which was made of sticks and enthusiasm. Dinner is pottage, a thick everything stew of peas, beans, cabbage, oats, and whatever else exists. Kept going over the fire, plus bread. Dense, dark, rye and barley bread, and a lot of it. A working peasant might put away 2 to 3 pounds of it in a day, and you wash it down with ale. Estimates from the period suggest ale consumption that could reach somewhere near a gallon a day. Before you're impressed, medieval ale was weak, closer to liquid bread than to anything at your bar. It was calories and it was safer than some of the water. It was hydration with a personality. Then sleep, and even sleep worked differently. The historian Roger Ekirch dug through centuries of records and found that pre-industrial people commonly slept in 2 shifts, a first sleep after dark, then an hour or 2 awake in the middle of the night to talk, pray, or tend the fire, then a second sleep until dawn. What you'd call insomnia at 2 a.m., they called the normal middle of the night, so there it is. A hard, smoky, taxed, precarious, oddly sociable life, the same rhythm for centuries. And it might have stayed that way for centuries more except for the last twist in this story. Because the single best thing that ever happened to the medieval peasant was also the worst thing that ever happened to medieval Europe. In 1347, the Black Death arrived. Over the next few years, it killed, by most estimates, somewhere between a third and half of Europe. Unimaginable. But when the survivors looked around, they noticed something. The land was still there, and the workers weren't. Suddenly, labor was scarce, which meant labor was valuable. Wages shot up. Lords tried to freeze pay by law. And in England, in 1381, the peasants marched on London to say what they thought about that. The revolt failed, but serfdom in England didn't recover. Within a few generations, the villain, the weak work, the whole apparatus was quietly dying. It took the deadliest pandemic in history to give the peasant leverage. So, was the medieval peasant's life worse than yours? In almost every physical way, yes. Colder, hungrier, shorter, smokier, and one wet summer away from disaster. But before you feel too superior, run the numbers on your own year. The Lord took a share of the peasant's labor, the church took a tenth, the mill took its cut, and there were fees on every milestone of life. Now look at your paycheck, your taxes, your rent, your fees, your subscriptions, and ask yourself what percentage of your labor you actually keep. The peasant at least could see the guy taking his cut. He lived up the hill. You've never even met yours.